Okay, hello and welcome everyone to our monthly Peplink Geeking Out webinar, co-hosted between the Mobile Internet Resource Center and Mobile Must Have. I am Chris, your host from the Mobile Internet Resource Center, and Eric, would you like to say hello?
Hi, I'm Erik, founder of MobileMustHave.com, and glad to be here with everybody.
And today's topic, we're going to be talking about hosting guest networks with your Peplink router. So if you want to be neighborly and share with friends, or even more neighborly and share with strangers, you can host guest networks, both by having a guest network and being willing to share the password but still protecting yourself securely, or you can even go further and have a captive portal, which is very similar to what campgrounds and coffee shops and many other places have, where they have a completely open network, but when you log into it, you get a pop-up that says, hey, agree to these terms of service and jump through these hoops. And once you click, you are online via that network. So that is a very powerful feature that Peplink, I mean, that's actually one of their main core markets, is like, commuter buses or trains or things like that, where people are offering open Wi-Fi like that, or coffee shops. So they have some actually very powerful features for hosting a captive portal that we're not going to cover most of them, but the basics we're going to cover today, because it's actually not too hard to do with your own router without getting too fancy. So cool. Captive portals are great. Do you want to explain, Eric, just a little bit about what is a captive portal, and what is it actually doing? Who's the captive?
You're the captive, or no, your guests are. Yeah, I've never really thought about the term captive, like a captive, and we're putting you in a portal, but I guess that does make a lot of sense now that I think about it. So, like when you go to Starbucks or somewhere else, usually like a hotel, or we just sold a bunch of Peplinks like a few months ago to a fleet of food trucks who are doing this, so it's getting a lot of people do it. You when you connect to maybe free Wi-Fi, usually on your phone or somewhere else, you'll get a pop-up, and it will it's a place where they can have you agree to terms, or verify that you're a human because you have to click something or whatever to kind of understand who you are before they allow you to the internet. And a lot of companies want to customize that heavily and collect your email address and other stuff and drive it into marketing and other things like that. But that portal is like it's like a toll gate. Stop here.
Yeah, and the captive is what it's trying to do, is it's capturing your web browser. Your web browser is trying to go to Google or to the New York Times or to the Mobile Internet Resource Center or to Mobile Must Have, and it's a little bit hackish the way that the router in between says, nope, nope, you're not going where you think you're going. Here is a pop-up window with these terms before we let you log in. So there's actually, I mean, for people with routers, this is often a headache, and we actually have a whole guide to breaking through a captive portal, because if your router is trying to connect to campground Wi-Fi or marina Wi-Fi, your router doesn't have an easy automatic way to say, oh yeah, I agree to these terms of service, and here's this and here's that. So getting past a captive portal is a whole different challenge than what we're going to talk about here, but we do have some guides and tips to that Cherie has linked to in the chat thread, so follow along there if you want to learn how to get past a captive portal. But today we're going to learn how to annoy people with a captive portal, um,
Or
the
turn it off completely and just set
or
up a guest network.
or turn it off completely and just set up a guest network. So you got to understand both sides of it. Um, we do have some kind of like just general high level tips of like why you might want to use a captive portal. And I came up with a few of them here. Let's see. What would your reasons be for why you do use a captive portal? You can have quotas and time and usage quotas, so you can actually put restrictions on your guests. You
Mhm.
can have terms and conditions. You can have terms and conditions that are tied to your network that people have to agree to. Sometimes when we host a captive portal at an event, we'll have the terms and conditions be bring a bottle of wine to the blue van. And that is your price for getting access to the internet. And what else is, those are, I guess, kind of the reasons you'd want to insert that. Or if you go a little bit more fancy, the collecting marketing material or email addresses and stuff like that.
Yeah. And we won't kind of cover this today, but we'll show folks a direction they can go to enable more advanced captive portal features. You could technically charge for your Wi-Fi. I mean,
Yes.
Not
You,
something a lot of folks would do, but that's how
yeah.
marinas and everything else do it. And you could technically do that with your Peplink.
And you do have to be worried that you might not be getting into a gray area with your plans that you have upstream that might
Yes.
not allow that. So they're not likely to bust you being, random campers selling $5 Wi-Fi passes in a campground, but technically that might put you in violation of your terms with AT&T or Verizon or Starlink or any place else. A lot of carriers actually have pretty strict rules about not reselling service. You can give it away to friends and even to strangers, but don't resell it unless you know what you're doing and you know the terms and are.
Yeah.
Um, there's a few reasons to not host a captive portal or not to host a guest network, particularly for strangers. The number one reason is you don't want to be tech support for random person 5 RVs down. Make sure you know what you're getting into, because there's a lot of potential issues that come up. And if, hey, the blue van is offering a free Wi-Fi in return for wine, once they give you that bottle of wine, they're going to want you to maybe come over and diagnose why their Wi-Fi can't reach that far, or other issues like that. um
Or do bad things on the internet with that free Wi-Fi that you found that you
yeah,
wouldn't want traced back to you.
yes, that's actually another good one, is you don't want to have bad things traced back to you. We'll give some tips on how to block some of those bad things. um you don't want to share. I mean, oftentimes you're in a place where you don't have a lot of bandwidth to go around, or you might, particularly like if you're hosting a webinar like this, you don't want your neighbors to be logging on and letting their kids stream or doing other things like that. So you might want to be able to turn on and off your captive portal, or turn it on and off your guest network. It's dependent on your own personal needs. You got to put your own usage first. um again, the tech support is an issue. And here's one other really important tip: is if you've got a crappy connection, don't share it, because people assume that a network that is being shared is going to be decent. And if you're barely online and you turn on your shared network with random strangers, again, if you're sharing with your friends, you can set the context of like, hey, we're barely online, I'm helping you, you can get online and post a photo, but don't stream anything. But if you're sharing with strangers, don't share a bad connection. It's just asking for them to have trouble and then to complain or ask for help or think it's on their end or stuff like that. Any other general high level tips of this before we show people how to set up guest networks?
No, I would just say that, don't get lost in the captive portal. We'll cover it. It's kind of cool. You can put a little photo up of your rig or do something fun like that before people accept the terms, or, put fun terms and all that stuff. But the reality is the vast majority of folks that we see do not set up a guest network and then give out their Wi-Fi password to tons and tons of people. So I would say that it is a good idea to set up a guest network, which will segment guest traffic to another part of your network where it can't see things like your printers and your computers and whatnot, and kind of keep it simple at that. Don't worry about the captive portal, but we'll show you how it works. But setting up a guest network in the middle is actually kind of a pretty useful thing to do. And I would recommend it. And we'll get into it. But the number one tech support issue I have with people who set up a guest network is they can never remember the passwords. We'll have some tricks on that too.
Okay, good. Awesome. Okay, so let's start with that, because yeah, setting up a guest network, and particularly a guest network with a password, so you can hand it out to people, but only people that you hand it out to are going to be logging on to. It's not an open network. Let's talk about setting up a guest network. So you want to switch to demo mode, Erik?
Sure. Let's see. We got a little uplink window here that's way too wide. Let me try to shrink it a little. Sorry.
Ding.
Can everybody see that?
That looks pretty good to me.
All right, good. So yeah, it's kind of, there's multiple steps here, because there's the wireless, which you think of as your guest network, but we actually have to set up a place for it to live, like its own sandbox, before we set up the wireless. So the first thing we're going to do is actually establish a network LAN segment here, a VLAN, that is going to be used for public.
Yeah,
And yep.
I was just gonna say a VLAN is a virtual LAN. It is kind of a virtually segmented network, and we have a big guide where we go into a lot of VLAN in prior webinar. So I'm sure he's going to be throwing the link to that guide and webinar into the chat. But we're going to show just the VLAN steps needed for a guest network right now. If you want to go deeper, be sure and check the other guide.
Yeah, and I think in our instructions that we're doing for this one, did you use 60?
I did use 60. You can use any IP address you want, other than Peplinks by default have their internal private network is 50.1. So 60 is a nice, easy to remember potential guest network IP address range. This is basically the range of addresses that are set aside as guest networks.
Yeah, and I try to avoid 0 dot or 1 dot just because so many networks out there use it. So it could potentially create routing issues. 60 is kind of never seen, so that's a good one. We could call this like the guest network and assign a VLAN, a unique VLAN number, 9. It'd probably be 2 or 3. I'm just worried this router probably has already 2 or 3 in there.
So the VLAN number is just a unique number, and you don't even have to remember it. It just has to be not a number you've already used for a different VLAN before. So most people who are setting up for their first guest network, they can basically pick anything.
This box, if you're going to be setting up a network, guest network, you're most likely going to want to uncheck. This is saying, hey, don't let this guest network play around with my other networks, because this is a guest network. I want it to be separate. So we're going to uncheck inter VLAN routing. This is where we would enable our captive portal. We don't necessarily have to do that right now, but we know it's there. Yeah, and then we have to tell the router that it needs to give out IP addresses to the clients, and that is what the clients will use to then connect to the network to get online. So we are going to set up, I'm just going to say, let's give it 100, 150. That's a good number of kind of clients. You could set this lower if you wanted to kind of restrict the max number of people that might show up.
Yep. And the important thing is that you can't be higher than 255 or really 254. So keep that in mind, because these are basically binary, 8-bit binary fields. So you can't have a number larger than 255.
Yeah, you could get this one down to 10 if you really wanted to just get more numbers, or 2 technically, but you're going to not have anything left over if you go there.
Yeah, so this is how many potential devices connect to your guest network.
Yeah. Now, when somebody connects to your network, let's say you were like at a large rally and you gave this out to 100 people, and they connected to the Wi-Fi for 5 seconds and then left. That number that you gave out, it will kind of save for them for potentially up to 24 hours. You could technically run out of IPs if you had 200 or 300 people, even if only 100 were there at a time. So I like to set this number down the least time to more like, 1 hour or 10 minutes, something like that, just because it will then, if a guest disappears, it's not going to hold that number for them for a long period of time. But that's a personal preference depending on your use case for the guest network. It's also kind of, well, yeah, I was going to say it's nice to have your IP not change when you reboot and stuff, but I don't know if that really matters for the average guest.
Okay.
And that's pretty much it, other than we want to make sure this DNS servers box is checked.
Yeah, that is on by default, but you don't want to turn that off because that is quite critical for this.
Yeah, this is what's telling this IP address .10 that Google exists over at 204 dot whatever.
And even more importantly, it's what's allowing the Peplink router to try to capture that connection to Google and insert its own pop-up. Is it has to basically intercept those calls. So if you don't have the DNS server set right, the captive portals will never pop up for people. So having that, leaving that at the default of being turned on is important.
Yep, absolutely. And then we would save that. I already have one, so it's just, I have it called public Wi-Fi, but that's my guest network. So that would be one of the networks that will appear right here. And then we'd be ready to start assigning a Wi-Fi network to it, right?
Okay, so yeah, let's now set up a Wi-Fi network that connects to this private network that you've created, or this guest network that you've created. Yes.
I'm actually really quickly let's just save it. Why not?
Okay.
Yes. Sorry. It'll be fast. It's all the same stuff we just saw.
Yep, boom.
Because this will be more fun because we can actually watch as we save things. That should be okay. Good.
There you are.
Save. So now we've got this new network here called guest Wi-Fi.
Uh-huh.
And we're going to hop over to the AP tab, and
And
we're going to create
AP
a
is
new
access point. That is
access
defining
point.
the Wi-Fi access point that your Peplink is acting as.
Go ahead and click new for a new network, and we'll call it, I call my RV Enterprise because I'm a Star Trek geek. Guest.
Yes. And here's like, if you are trying to do a captive, if you're trying to make this open to a bigger, broader public audience, you might want to have an SSID that lures them in. So I've sometimes set it as trade wine for Wi-Fi. So when people scan their networks, they'll be like, oh, what's that? And they might check it out. So, you can get creative with the names, or you could say what your blog name is or something like that. You can, put whatever you want in the SSID if you're trying to appeal to the public and not just your friends and neighbors that you tell about it.
Exactly. I was laughing because in Michigan, someone has "I hate Bill." Like, who's Bill? Okay, so we're going to now make sure we assign that the correct VLAN. So we're going to go over to the guest Wi-Fi, and there's a couple settings here. Broadcast. Do we want this to physically show up when people scan for Wi-Fi, or do we want it to be hidden and they have to know the exact name and password to add it? For the most part, it's not necessarily much of a security risk to let it broadcast, so it's much easier to connect to.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have your security policy. For the vast majority of folks, I would say you want to set a password here. And this is something that you can just quickly remember. You don't have to worry about captive portals or accepting or whatnot, but you are putting a gate in front of your guest network, so that only people with that password could gain access to it.
And yeah, the password would typically be WPA2, WPA3 personal would be the way you would set that.
Mm-hmm. Now, the way I always tell people to do this is I tell them to put in their cell phone number, because you're never going to forget it. And it's sort of secure, but not overly secure. And it's every person I've had do that uses their guest network because they remember the password. But
it kind of also gives you a little bit of restraint. You'll only give out your guest network to people that you would trust with your phone number. So that might give you a hesitation before you give it out to random guy walking down the street. So that's actually a pretty good show.
Yeah, it's worked out really well for us over time. So, but yeah, and don't make it the same as your other network password. A lot of people do that.
Yes. No, don't make
What was the point of that? I don't do much else here. Is there anything else that you typically change on this page?
Let's see. What was it here? There's some stuff you can do under guest protective, blocking things, but there's stuff that I don't see any reason to turn on. The block all private IPs, I think, will end up blocking phones that generate basically private IPs and stuff.
Like every iPhone, yeah.
Yeah, so they generate private Macs, so it probably wouldn't.
Oh yeah, true.
It's private Macs, but I've never found a reason to turn any of these access features on. You can set it like only MAC addresses under the firewall features, only certain MAC addresses can connect and stuff like that, but that's kind of defeats the point of a guest network. So I don't think any of the rest of these you would actually bother with for most people.
Yeah. So then we would go ahead and save that network.
Yep. Hey.
And now we have enterprise guest.
Woohoo, enterprise guest. Now, and yeah, what you have to apply changes for it to actually start broadcasting. You don't need to do that now because that'll just stall your router for a moment.
We'll just sit around waiting. Yeah.
Do you want to show off the schedule feature while we're here?
Sure. So we can create a schedule if we don't want this network to be available all the time. So let's say we're like, we really just want this on from X amount of time to X amount of time.
And I find this also very useful as a way to just turn it off, because Peplink doesn't have a way to disable a network without deleting it, and then you've got to reset it up again. So I always create, one of the first things I do with my router is I create a schedule that is, the schedule name is always off, is I give it the name always off, and then set the schedule to always off. And by creating that schedule, then inside of the network, rather to disable it, you just turn it to off, and to enable it again, you turn it to on. And then you can maybe also have a time schedule of like, hey, I only want my guest network up except during office hours. I want it up, during basically the inverse of this is I want my guest network to be up except when I'm working. And you can have that where it'll automatically turn on and off. And when you're back at that, editing the settings on the network, you can just change around which schedule that network is applying to. And mostly I just use the always on and always off. And always on is the default that's built in. I've been suggesting to Peplink for years they have a built-in always off, but it only takes a second to create it right here. It's create an always off, and you can toggle the networks on and off easily without deleting them, which is, then you have to recreate it again, which is annoying.
Yeah, but this is a nice little Easter egg that I didn't know about, the system schedule area.
Yes.
Because you'd think that it would be right here when you're in this network and you want to just tell it,
yep,
oh, always on, but there's no other choice.
There's no other
So
option there. And there's no way to disable a network temporarily. You could turn off the broadcast, but it's still there in the background, and people with scanners can still find, with more advanced scanners can still find it. So if you actually want to shut your guest network down, create that always off schedule, and then just come here and turn it.
Well, it's just a drop down.
Yep, it's just a drop down. So that's always fun when I find it. I have a trick that Erik hasn't run across yet. So yay.
I'm like, this is my router, so I'm like, I'm adding that right now.
Yes.
That's a great idea.
And then it's a preset there. Save that, and then it'll be there on the other thing when you are changing it.
Yeah, there we go.
Boom, always off, and it's no longer broadcasting. And again, for guest networks, you probably don't want to have them always broadcasting. You want to know when you're able to share. You don't want to share when you've got a fringe weak connection. So it's a great tip there. Now, before we get to the captive portal side of things, there's a few other tweaks you can do to kind of keep your guests from taking, using too much bandwidth and stuff. There's how to set lower priority and content blocking for guests. So this is under the advanced quality of service features. And we've done a prior webinar where we really focused on this. So this is just going to be a quick pointer to that, but otherwise go look at the quality of service webinar and guide that I think Cherie has shared in the chat. And yeah, there it is. So, but here into the quality of service, that you could have a group, and one of the default groups is guest to begin with, but you can make other guests and set up a rule for them and make a new rule that says everybody who is on that subnet that you created, now you have to remember that address, so 192.168.60.0 or 1, yeah, is now going to be a guest. So everybody who is connected to this is the guest network is now assigned to the quality of service group guest. They're completely unrelated. They're just both using the same word guest. And then under bandwidth control, you can then enable individual bandwidth limits. And you could say, hey, guest people on the guest network are limited to 10 megabits per second or 20 megabits per second or whatever speed limit you want to have that keeps the guests from hogging your usage. So that's a really quick thing you can do. And then also under firewall and content blocking, so also down on the side there, these same groups, you can basically set up a firewall that only applies to guests. And it wouldn't start there. I'd just say like turn on block P2P file sharing and pornography and maybe update sites. You don't want people downloading Windows updates or whatnot. And say, actually the opposite of that is staff and manager that doesn't apply to, but guest is now subject to that block. So your guests are not going to be able to go torrenting and doing all those other things that will completely suck up a network and potentially get you in trouble if they're downloading pirated movies and stuff. So that's probably a pretty reasonable thing to do for your guests, particularly if they're guests that you don't trust, strangers. And see, one other Yeah. One other potential thing is under the outbound policies, you can also, we've done a guide on outbound policies in the past. So again, we're not going to go deep into this, but you can have a policy that is just applying to people who are on that guest network. So say you don't want your guests going out over your cellular connections, only Starlink. And maybe that you just say, that people who are on that network, again, 60.1s, and going to any place in the internet with any protocol, and you can say enforced. My guests only can use Starlink because that's unlimited. I don't have a data cap on that. You save that, and people on that network ignore the rest of your cellular connections, everything else, and will only go out Starlink. And if Starlink is offline, well, the guest network is not going anywhere. So you've got some advanced things. The things that Peplink routers just let you do can be very powerful when applied to guest networks. So we've covered these all in prior webinars and such, but yeah, there you able to put links networks in priority order and all these other things that we've covered in the outbound policy webinar. So I think, is there anything else to think about with when it comes to
I
just
think the only it's a niche segment of folks, but if you are playing around with more than one access point and you have a device or a Peplink router that has the AP controller, there are some additional things you can do to kind of tell the device which access points are going to do which networks.
Yeah,
so if you do have more than one, what I typically do is I hop over to settings here and I actually create a new, I already have one created and only let you create one unless you have unassigned access points. But I've created a second, normally you'll just see default and it'll just have the embedded router and that you cannot change. Okay. But you can actually go into access points here and you can assign these to different profiles, AP profiles. So if you created a profile in here and you assigned it like I did, where I have the AX, I have 2 access points in that other profile, and then you dig into the settings there, it says, hey, just broadcast these SSIDs on these frequencies, and it'll apply to any access point that's in that profile. Okay. And as you can see, I don't have guests set up here. For me, what this allows me to do is take the embedded Wi-Fi in my router, which I actually don't use that because I have interior access points. And then what I do with it is I say, hey, just use it for my guest and just use it for free Wi-Fi because it's plugged into my roof antenna. So now it's actually transmitting outside of my RV with that guest network. So it just gives me a little bit more segmentation. And in the default profile, you can, depending on the model of your router, but you can tell it to disable Wi-Fi as WAN, for example, and just work as an access point, and then it'll give more bandwidth to the guest network. Or you can say, hey, I want to share it and try to do both at the same time.
And
having flexible.
Having a network doing Wi-Fi as WAN and also sharing its network is a recipe for being poor at both. So we always have our our roof antennas and our whatever being the Wi-Fi as WAN if we're using that, and inside our access points are hosting our local network. So yeah, that is a good thing.
Yeah, this is fun. And there's an unintended benefit on the dashboard, which is now you can toggle off this Wi-Fi and it's only going to turn off the roof antenna or the embedded antenna in the router, which I don't use for my local clients. So there's sort of 2 ways you can get to turning off your Wi-Fi based on how you created that schedule. Nice. Or you can click this off here, but just anyone without an access point, don't do that, or else you're going to turn off your only Wi-Fi.
Yes. But this is definitely
you're going to be hunting for an Ethernet cable.
An advanced feature for people who have access points and they're trying to segment their network, and it's particularly on boats or big RVs, having access points are a great way to have great Wi-Fi inside and then something up on the roof that is both for sharing and Wi-Fi as WAN. So good tip there. Now want to talk about captive portal configuration and like how to take this to if you had an open network and you didn't set a password, how do you want to let people share this?
Yeah, this is like, I don't do this a lot, but I'm recalling we're under network, captive portal.
Yep.
And then I just created one for this group that we could kind of play around with, but you would typically click new portal. here, and then you would name that portal. You'd want to enable it.
And well,
And
actually, here is because you're creating a second one. It now wants a
it's
different host name. So if you create the first one, it goes to Peplink's default. So
it
just go to
just
your
goes to this
right.
one. Yeah,
Yes,
here we
because
go.
they do some magic if you're using the host name of captive-portal.peplink.com, where they kind of handle some of the background stuff that keeps security keys from popping up and complaining. So probably only want to have one portal, and you just want to let it stick with the default right there. But the first, like when you give it a name, then click on enable. You should be able to do this here. You'll see all your networks, and you can click which networks are under captive portal. So this would be the same as if you had clicked captive portal when you were defining the network. So the setting applies either place. So if you turned it on over there, you'd see it here. If you turn it on here, you'd see it there. So you've got your guest Wi-Fi if you want that one also. So you got your two public networks. Now these both will have the captive portal will take over and capture people as they log on. And now you get to say, what does this mean? What is the captive portal server actually doing to them? So access mode here is for 99% of you will be open access, because you don't have a password server that is going to let people have to log in. So it's going to be just agree to terms and go. You're not actually asking for a user ID. You can have user authentication if you have a password server or external server. So these are the two different types of network password servers you could have.
I don't want to set up an LDAP server.
No, an external server is, these are you've actually played with one of these, right? Is Kuva Chill and Hotspot Systems.
Yeah, I've used Hotspot Systems. It's hotspotsystem.com. Relatively low cost system that you set up that is designed to be like a cloud management system for captive portals. So like, you own 20 coffee shops, you can set them all up to have a splash screen display centrally, charge for Wi-Fi, display ads, all those things.
Yeah, so these are the things if you're wanting to be doing much more fancy side of things with captive portals, and you'd have to have an account with either of these two services, and then they'd probably have tutorials and instructions. We're not going to go into that. We're just going to focus on open access, the things you can do on your router with no external servers involved. So open access. Now you have quotas. What are the quotas you can set?
So we've got time and we have distance, amount of data.
Yes.
So the default here looks like it's 4 hours, and then setting these to 0 would get you unlimited.
Yeah, I like to have I tend to set the time quota to 0, because you don't, if you've got guests, you don't want them to be upset because their time ran out. But I don't like the idea of a guest being able to download 50 gigabytes or something. So I might set a gigabyte or 2 gigabytes or something like that as a data quota. One thing that is a limitation if you're hosting your own captive portal, you can't reset somebody's quota. You can't reset a quota on a device that is if your neighbor is like, hey, I'm trying to download something and I ran out of data, and the pop-up says I'm out of data until tomorrow. You can't reset that I can find out, other than rebooting your entire router. So if you are trying to be generally friendly, you might want to have these be very high quotas or unlimited, because if you do have a friend that you're trying to let use your guest network through a captive portal and they've used up their data, you don't want to have to reboot your router to give them more. So keep that in mind. Next is
I mean, you've got some things where you can tie them really into certain domains or networks if you want, or you can tie this into specific devices.
Yeah, the allowed networks I actually find useful is these are domains that can be visited no matter what, whether somebody agrees to the portal terms or service or not. So for you could have mobilemusthave.com, and which means somebody can get to your guest network, and once they're on there, they can be on mobilemusthave.com and buy a new router or something. For us, I could set it for technomadia.com and the Mobile Internet Resource Center, rvmobileinternet.com. So these are kind of domains that are not blocked by the captive portal, that people don't have to agree to terms. So you can let guests go straight to your allowed things. And you can, if you're someplace where you just like want to like share, like let people access the information page for a festival, like we were just at Eclipse Fest up in Oregon. I made Eclipse Fest's webpage accessible on the guest network captive portal without logging in or doing anything, so people can go and see the schedule of events without anything. So you can put networks here that you want to give special preference to, you know, bypass the block. What else is here? The splash page. This is now where you get to start to customize what the portal is and the terms. Built in is the easy way to go. This is letting your router do the splash page, but it's very limited with what you can put on it. We'll show you how to edit it in a second. But if you want to get fancy, you can go and do an external, basically if you have your own web server someplace, you can have an external page be the splash page. There's a few little programmy things that you need to do, so that's way more advanced than we're going to cover, but I do link in the article that goes with this to a guide that Peplink has of what you need to do on your own web server to host your own splash page to let people log in and let the router know that they've logged in properly. So but we're going to focus on the built-in here. Next up, I think checking this box, it's off by default, is automatically show splash page on Safari. That does help get the splash page to come up sometimes. It's that I would check. And that's about it. So now let's click here to preview and customize the splash page and show you what you can do. Oh, hey, free Wi-Fi, no strings. So this is what the page would, this is the pop-up that somebody would get if they logged into this network. And you can see there's basically only 4 pages that exist, and you'll select between them. Now there's the login, the TNC, terms and conditions, the success page that comes up once they've actually done that, and the quota reach page when they run out of data or whatever. And now you can customize these very simply by turning on edit mode. And once edit mode's here, basically anything here, you can edit the text and you could change the header image. You know, by uploading a file, and in the empty string, that section in the middle is where I would put bring wine to the blue van. In the terms and conditions, you can put in whatever. They give you kind of like general default legalese of like, you know, don't do anything illegal, blah, 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 blah. But, you know, you could put whatever you want here. You could put multiple lines. Things you can't do is you
I'm
can't
gonna forget to delete that.
you
Be like, why do I keep knocking with wine?
It's not a problem. Have a little box they could put it in. And you could change what the agree button says. You can change the you must accept. You can basically edit any of the text here, but you can't put links, which I find kind of frustrating. So you can't say, hey, go to our blog or go here or go there. But you can edit the text on any of those different pages. And you could edit the terms and conditions, which is a huge big page of text. And then that's basically it. If somebody hits that checkbox and clicks, I want to be online, they're online. The only other thing you'd edit is the custom landing page at the bottom. If you put a little check mark in the custom landing page, you could put where they will be redirected to once they click continue browsing. So you could put mobilemustave.com or rvmobileinternet.com, and that will just jump them to your page. Or you could maybe have a welcome page that's like, hey, you're surfing the net. Did you really bring the wine by or whatnot? So you can have some control there. But what you don't get is you don't get any way to set a password. You don't get any way to collect somebody's email address. You don't get any way to gather any information from people, because this is well, I guess it's privacy compliant. It collects no information. All you're doing is basically saying, did you agree to these terms? Good, you're good to go, you're online. So there's that. If you want to do fancier things where you collect people's login info, or log their Facebook profile, make them log in with their Facebook ID, or log in with a keyword you give, You can do much fancier things with captive portals if you set them up inside Peplink's in control. But again, that is a whole nother level of complexity that we're not going to cover today. But just know that if you do want to do fancier things, but not go as far as going with the hotspot systems and a commercial provider, if you have in control and you're paying for prime care, which you need for in control, you can do some fancier things by defining your captive portals and in control. But again, it's a lot more complicated to do that, so we're not going to cover that. So let's see, anything else about setting this up? Or
No, I think that's just once this is saved and ready to go and you have your portal in existence, I think that checkbox, like you said, will reverse apply this, but
yeah,
just making
yep,
sure that
turn
we
it on
have
there.
our, there it is. So,
Yeah.
so then that's all you really need.
Yeah, and you'll see the coffee shop, the little coffee symbol that appeared on that network here. That network is on a captive portal. You'll also another symbol, if this network is on a schedule, you'll also see a little clock symbol there. These are just two little things that pop up on your list of SSIDs, is which ones are captive portalized and which ones are currently on a schedule. So you can see that. And did you save a screen of like what the pop-up looks like for an end user, or did we just saw it in the edit mode? But yeah, now if somebody connects to the network,
Yeah,
that's
this is
what
pretty
they'll
much
see.
it. I mean, just minus this little page thing down here, they just get this.
Yep.
And it's been, and it works well. And I think, I, from time to time, will just pop over to my status client list tab and search by networks and
Yes.
sort of see what's going on with guests.
Yeah, so this is the only way you can see if somebody is using your network, is you'll see if they are connected to that guest network you've created, and you're like, oh, okay, what device is that? Who might that be? And so it is sometimes a little unnerving to have random strangers surfing around via your connectivity, but it's also can be kind of fun at events and stuff. And the first time I played with captive portals was like, God, like 7 years ago, where, oh yeah, 2015, when we first launched Escapers, the vendor area at the Escapees Escapade was in a metal shed with nobody had connectivity. So I set up a Peplink on a plastic chair right in the outside of the fairgrounds hall, broadcasting a captive portal inside, basically saying, hey, Wi-Fi provided by Technomadia, because nobody's cellular is working and all the vendors can't run credit card transactions, and set that up, and people were very happy. So yeah, you can have some fun stuff with that. And that was God, that was a long time ago. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's got any questions that are related to this topic, throw them into the chat right now. Otherwise, we'll end the recording and do just any other quick general Q&A before we move on. We'll quickly plug the next webinar will be, I believe, November 16th, and it's going to just be a discussion around choosing your ideal Peplink router. So we're going to be having that just general Q&A. It'll probably be actually Cherie and Erik having that conversation. So let's see, any questions related?
I had a private message from Stuart say, what happens if you forget your password, like I've done?
You forget your network password?
For
your private. So if you forget the password for your private network, you can just edit it. And so if you go back to the SSID under AP, but you could also see it too. So like go to your guest network there, not probably your main private one here, but the guest one, which will, if you turn hide characters off, you'll see. It's not his real phone number. Good. Yes. Okay. That's the 555 is
for
a good
anyone
one.
who remembers actually calling to dial information.
Yes. So yeah,
a long time ago.
Turning off hide characters will reveal the network password for any SSID that is saved inside the Peplink router. So you could look up the password, or you can just enter a new one if you want to as well.
And if you forgot all of your wireless passwords, if that's what you're implying, you can do a factory reset of the device, which will just bring it back to factory, or you could add the device to in control if it's still under warranty, and then you can hop into it via in control and reset the password if you totally lost all Wi-Fi passwords. Happens.
Question is, when I set this up, I keep getting an insecure connection. The computer wanted it to be HTTPS. How do you get around this?
So this is a problem that the key built into the Peplink routers is will expire every year. So if your firmware is more than a year out of date, the captive portal will pop up a security issue in the web browser saying, I don't trust this server, and people can still bypass that saying log in anyway. But if you are keeping your firmware up to date, that shouldn't happen. It still sometimes does, which is a little bit annoying. But it is mostly it's a problem, and you can see it in the Peplink forums. It's a problem with people who have not kept they're running an older router or an older firmware, like people who are still on 8.2. The security certificate that is tied to captive-portal.peplink.com is expired because the certificates only last a year. So keeping your router up to date will keep that captive-portal.peplink.com captive portal host name up to date. If you want to do your own host name and manage your own security certificate, that's where you would edit that host name on that portal thing, and then you can upload a security certificate to the router. Again, that is a much higher level of geekery. But then that takes it out of Peplink's hands and puts it in yours, where you're having to keep the security certificate up to date for HTTPS. So it's that is, again, is to keep it simple, is why Peplink has their own defined captive-portal special magic URL.
I don't have any other.
Okay, so I think that's the question there. I'm going to end the recording. We'll hang out for just another minute and see what else might come up. Erik, you want to turn off the screen share and we could just say goodbye really quick, and I'll end the recording. So, hey, there we are. It's been a great webinar hanging out with you, Erik, and looking forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Okay, let's stop this recording. Boom.